Mr. President, distinguished members of the European Parliament, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and a privilege to have been invited to be with you today. I'd like to start by thanking the ALDE group. I only got in from New York today, but I feel already that I am among friends. I'm here today as the president of the Institute of Modern Russia, an organization based in the United States that campaigns for democratic change and reform in the country of my birth. But I'm also here as a son of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, a businessman jailed for being too successful, a visionary silenced for being too optimistic, a philanthropist locked up for being too generous. As you know, my father has been declared a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International. There could be no clear appreciation of the struggle he has waged in this. My father and I share with you the same outlook and the same values. We want for Russia what the European Union has secured over the past half-century: genuine democracy, vibrant civil society, human rights, and an unshakable commitment to the rule of law. But we all know that Russia is still very, very far from accomplishing these goals. And in fact, many of us doubt even whether Russia wants to accomplish these goals. True, Russia is a member of the Council of Europe, and that gives Kremlin respectability. Membership of the Council of Europe allows Russia to believe it achieves the same standards of governance as in the West. But the difference between rhetoric and reality is clear. There is systematic abuse of the rule of law in Russia. The Yukos affair, and my father's place at the center of it, is a perfect illustration of this. The fact that almost a decade on, this case is still reverberating around the world shows how emblematic it has become. And naturally, I welcome President Medvedev's decision yesterday to order a review of the legality of my father's conviction. I welcome this as his son and also as a Russian. The response by the authorities will show us whether this is an empty gesture to placate voters' anger or whether it signifies a genuine shift in the government's attitude to the victims of its legal nihilism. Sunday's experience shows us that holding elections is not the same as having a democratic system. If those elections are deliberately undermined by banning opposition candidates from participating, manipulating the media, and stuffing ballot boxes, then they're failing its purpose. And they make a mockery of Russia's pretense to be part of the international community of democracies. But that's enough about what has gone on this past Sunday. This hearing is about what to be expected after the election. So let me make a few observations. I believe it's richly ironic that the man Russians turned to 12 years ago for stability is now the primary cause of Russia's instability. What's clear to me after the election is that Russia under Putin is an unstable Russia, an impatient Russia, and a dangerous Russia. Undoubtedly, political protests will continue in the months ahead. People in Russia, at last, have lost their fear of Putin, and they feel able to freely express their contempt for the corrupt system of government that he built and which sustains him in power. Putin thought that his potent combination of revanchist nationalism and economic liberalization would be the bread and circuses that would keep the Russian people contented. But history shows us that economic liberalization turns consumers into citizens. And that's what's happened in Russia, with Putin presiding over the period of economic growth. Those citizens are now insisting on their rights, and they will go on doing so. But they will also insist on Putin keeping up their living standards high, as he managed to do so for much of his first presidency. And if the economy, which remains heavily dependent on oil and gas exports, takes a serious hit in the coming years, Putin will be even in more trouble than he is today. And he'll be in trouble not only with the middle classes, but with the elites around him whose wealth and power depend on maintaining the system. Putin's pre-election promises added approximately 160 billion to the federal budget, increasing its share of the GDP above 40%. It now needs oil at $130 a barrel to break even. And with a fledgling global demand and a weak global economy, that figure is unlikely. This will further undermine the fiscal stability that the lower middle class has come to expect of the regime, increasing their presence at the protests. So I see a Kremlin increasingly besieged in the months and years ahead. A Kremlin struggling to hold back the tide of popular indignation. A Kremlin still in denial about Russia's diminishing role in the world. A Kremlin still in denial about Russia's disastrous demographics and its one-dimensional economy. This will come to a head, and probably sooner rather than later. The question is, will Putin go with his gut instincts and lash out, suppressing the protests and going on a spending spree to appease the population? Or will he create a legacy of reform to help ease himself out of office? Whatever he decides to do, many observers can't see Putin serving one full term, let alone two. He will find it colossally difficult to change the system he himself has created, due to enormous vested interests of his inner circle. But if one thing is certain, it's that change will surely come to Russia. And hopefully that change will be peaceful and democratic, led by a united and coherent opposition with a sustainable vision for Russia's future. This is the challenge and the duty of all Democrats in Russia. It is also the challenge, and I believe, the duty of the European Union. Because if the EU believes, truly believes, in the sanctity of its founding values, it surely cannot afford any longer to compromise its credibility by turning a blind eye and extending a warm embrace to Putin. Yes, Russia will remain an important partner for Europe after this election. Yes, Europe will still buy a lot of Russian gas and oil. And yes, Europe will still have to deal with Putin. But let's not kid ourselves. Europe cannot simply ignore the electoral fraud and disregard the protesters and retain its credibility as a force for democratic progress. We've seen Europe start to seize its opportunity in the Middle East this past year. Europe should see Russia through the same prism. A society receptive to ideas, eager for encouragement, and impatient for change. But for many reasons, Russia will be a much tougher test of the EU's values than the Middle East. So to the question, what's next? I say, that's not only in the hands of the Russian people. Europe, too, can help to shape Russia's inevitable transition in the coming years, but only by remaining united, firm, and persistent in its messaging. I shall conclude here. I simply want to say thank you again to the ALDE group and the European Parliament from me, from my father. His spirits are sustained by the support so many members of Parliament have given him. Like me, and like you, he dares to dream of a different Russia. It's now within our grasp. Let's take our chance.